Welcome to SmallTalk by Sfarim Chatter. I'm Nachi Weinstein. On this episode of SmallTalk, I'm going to be joined by Rabbi Moshe Schochet, who is the founding head of high school, of Hadar High School for Girls in Boca Raton, Florida, and he is the author of the newly published book, Moadim with Meaning, Inspiring Messages for the Yom Tovim, published by Mosaic Press, which we'll be discussing on the episode. So thank you, Rabbi Schochet, for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
What can you tell the listeners about this book?
So I think it's actually a very interesting, an interesting book. I think it's unique in many, many ways. I'll share what I believe to be our four very unique ways of what makes this book distinguishable and distinct amongst others. First of all, if you'll take a look at many of the entries, you will notice that it's a tremendously wide spectrum of commentaries and perushim that I quote. So I quote many of the Litvisha of the past generation, current generation, be it Rav Chaim Friedlander, be it Rav Shimshon David Pincus, be it Rav Dessler, be it Rav Yerucham Levovitz, be it Rav Yerucham Olshin, on the one end of the spectrum. And yet I'm also quoting the Chidush Harim and the Sfas Emes and the Stonim Rebbe, and Simcha Bun of Pshischa, and Rav Meilich Biederman, and the Osterthor Rebbe, and Rach Mishtravka Rebbe, and everything in between. I don't think too many Svarim go from one extreme, so to speak, to the other and really unify, so to speak, the V'yesu Chulam Aguda Achas La'asos V'tzon Chabalev of Shalim to really unify Torah in a very unique way. I would say that would be number one. Number two is they're short. The essays are all under a page long, 2 or 3.5 paragraphs. And I think that makes the learning enjoyable and also very accessible to a wider range of readers. Your ability to read Hebrew isn't a barrier to you, and you have an ability to access so many different insights from so many different incredible personalities that otherwise may not be accessible to a wider range audience. I would say number three is, if you'll notice, each entry, the last paragraph is always the same theme, and that it's relatable. It brings it back to our lives. As a not only a principal but a Rebbe, I still teach. One of the things I always stress to my students is tefillah is our way to talk to Hashem, but the Torah is Hashem's way of talking to us. And allowing us to be able to see that the Torah is a Torah's Chaim, it's alive and well, it's not some antiquated document, but it's something that day in and day out, in 5786, 2026, the Torah continues to provide us those messages and can serve as talking points that people can share at their Yom Tovim table or their Shabbos table, is something that I really think is something that is attractive about the Sefer. And it's not only on the Shalosh Regalim, it is called Moadim with Meaning, but you shouldn't think that it's limited just to the Shalosh Regalim. We start with Elul, and we go to Rosh Hashanah, the Aseret Yimei Tshuva, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Chanukah, the Daled Parshios, Purim, Pesach, Sfiras HaOmer, Shavuos. Interestingly enough, the Ben HaMitzarim, Kara Alai Moed. So we stick a Ben HaMitzarim in there, and actually it concludes with a whole section on Hallel, 10 pieces on Hallel to be able to really understand Hallel. And at the end of the book, there's something also I think very unique, and that is, this was actually a suggestion and by the encouragement of Mosaica, is I quote so many different perushim with so many different backgrounds that they encouraged me, and I produced a 5 to 6 page, what they call sources cited, but it's really a 2 to 3 line biography about every single perush. There's many, where they lived, what time did they live in, what era did they live in, what did they contribute, what was their role as part of Klal Yisrael above and beyond just the Sfarim that they published. And it allows the reader not only to connect to the Torah itself, but it allows us to connect to the people that we're quoting and really be able to appreciate the Shalshal HaMasorah, our very precious and unique tradition.
Yeah, I always think it's nice when they do that, especially like you're saying, when it's a sefer that's quoting from a variety of sources, and sometimes the reader isn't familiar with who those are or when they lived.
Sure.
So I think it's very nice to add that. And as you said, it really runs the gamut of all the Yom Tovim. It's not just the main ones, the big ones, so to speak. Also, you mentioned Daled Parshas. You split it up. So you have Parshas Golem, Parshas Zachar, Purim, Parshas Parah, Parshas Chodesh, which is nice. So separate sections. And really, as you said, they're essentially short Divrei Torah in English on the Moadim. So it's not just like long. Sometimes you have Moadim as far, I think, tend to be like these long thematic pieces. Maybe they were drushes or whatever it is. So it's hard to find things. And it's also nice because when it comes to Moadim, many people, I'm sure, are looking for Dvar Torah on Yom Tov. And it's not like when you come to the Shabbos table, like, oh, what's the parsha this week? You find Dvar Torah to say. Sometimes Yom Tov is much harder than that. And, we were talking before, and I told you how when it comes to Chumash Svarim, and I very often do on some of these, and it's like, wait, why another Chumash Sefer? It's always what I ask. So Moadim, it's a variation of that, because there's not so many, I think, dedicated Moadim Svarim. You just see, like, Moadim Divrei Torah tossed into a Chumash Sefer, or like you have a Drush Sefer, but you not have a dedicated Moadim Sefer. So you wrote already a Sefer on Chumash. Was this like the natural stepping stone? You go from Chumash to Moadim, or why did you decide to publish the Sefer on Moadim?
Yeah, so actually my first Sefer that I published on the Parsha was really an outgrowth of a COVID project. I had started a group. I found that people, because they were so isolated, they were looking for more inspiration. And I had started like a WhatsApp group where I post these Divrei Torah, these audio Divrei Torah twice a week on the Parsha. And over the course of a year and a half, I turned around and I had a whole Sefer. And so I decided to publish it. And I had gotten, Baruch Hashem, a lot of positive feedback. People had something to say over at their Shabbos table. It was easy to prepare. It was easy to say over. It was something that they could connect to. And it ended up serving as a platform to have larger, deeper discussions with their guests, with their family members. And so once I had finished that Sefer, I said to myself, what about the Moadim? Yeah, as you described before, when you start looking for Moadim Sfarim, not everything clicks, and you have to do a lot more research if you want to find the right things to say over, that are easy to say over, that are connected, they're relatable. And so I started writing. One of the things I did is that I started writing the Sefer around Pesach time, and I decided that, there's a lot of Haggadahs, but what happens to all the other meals that are not the Siddharim? You can only use the Haggadah really for two of the many, many meals that are offered on Pesach. So I decided all of my Divrei Torah for Pesach are dafka nothing to do with anything having to do with the Haggadah, because then that would offer the reader an opportunity to have what to say over during their lunch meals, during the second days of Yom Tov, on Chol Hamoed. And that was kind of how I got the ball rolling. And it turned into, if I'm doing it on Pesach, let me do Sfiras Omer, because that's, according to the Ramban, Sfiras Omer is the Chol Hamoed between Pesach and Shavuos. And then I had Shavuos and so on and so forth. And I basically felt that it was an opportunity to tap into a niche area that, like you said, there are not a lot of English Svarim specifically and exclusively dedicated, just to the Moadim.
So you mentioned earlier that you have all sorts of sources, all different types. So if you want to give an example or two of the listener that they can get a feel of like what kind of Divrei Torah they can expect to find in Moadim with meaning.
Sure. So, we're only under 2 weeks away from Purim. So I guess I'll share a brief thought from the Sfas Emes that the Pasuk says in the Megillah, Mordechai lo yichrev lo yishtachave. The Mordechai was what ultimately served as the catalyst for what annoyed Haman to the degree that he wanted to commit genocide and was able to persuade Achashverosh, because Mordechai didn't bow down to him. Lo Mordechai lo yichrev lo yishtachave. The Sfas Emes, Zuchus Egin Aleinu, asks a question that, until I saw the question, I've read the Megillah year in and year out and never noticed. But once he asked the question, he can't read the pasuk any other way. And he points out that the tense of that pasuk is incorrect. It really should have said, Mordechai lo kara v'lo hishtachave. Mordechai did not bow down in past tense. And that's what ultimately infuriated Haman. What do you mean, Mordechai lo yichre v'lo yishtachave in the future tense? That didn't happen yet. And the Sfas Emes offers an incredible answer. And he explains that Mordechai, the ultimate author of the Megillah, wanted all of us, as the descendants reading this narrative, to not only appreciate the storyline, but to recognize Mordechai lo yichrev lo yishtachave wasn't actually referring to Mordechai himself, but rather was instructing us that in every generation we have to have our Mordechais. We have to have people who are willing to stand up for the Masorah. We have to be assertive. We have to be ambitious. We have to have courage. We have to have bravery to defend our Masorah, our tradition, never compromising, never allowing any contaminants or any pollution. And that's why the Megillah says, Mordechai lo yichrev lo yishtachve. You should know, says Mordechai, do what's in the future. Stand up. And that's something that we have to internalize even until this very day. We live in a crazy world with a lot of outside noise and a lot of values that are not compatible with our belief system. We, as fathers and mothers, as teachers, as community members, we have to stand up and internalize that message, and we have to be the Mordechais in every way that speaks to our kochos and our strengths. Mordechai lo yichrev lo yishtachve wasn't commenting simply on Mordechai and what he actually did, but was charging us with the responsibility of replicating that courage and bravery throughout the generations of Klal Yisrael until this very day. it's a beautiful idea from the Sfas Emes, and I think it speaks to the heart. It speaks to the heart about what our responsibilities are if we want to successfully pass the Masorah on to the next generation. On the flip side, I'll share with your permission one other thought, and that's on Parshas Parah. And as I mentioned, I quoted, the Litvish and the Hasidish. So I'll quote a beautiful insight from Rabbi Moshe Schochet, the Rosh Yeshiva of Beis Medrash Gavoha in Lakewood, BMG. And he points out that, we read Parshas Parah, and the common suggestions to why we read Parshas Parah, getting close and rapidly approaching the month of Nisan is because we're going to bring the Korban Pesach, and as a result, we have to be metar, we have to pure ourselves. If we were Tamei Meis, we had been contaminated by the impurities of a deceased individual, and so therefore we have to learn the halachos and be reminded through reading the story of Parah Aduma and all of the necessary details and the halachos to prepare for that. But he gives a different approach, and he suggests that when a person goes into Pesach, there's a lot of questions that one can ask. Right? We read the story of what the Mitzrayim subjected the Jewish people to, the heinous crimes, the infanticide and the killing of babies, and the horrible treatment and the slavery that Klal Yisrael had to endure. And one can't help but ask themselves, how can HaKadosh Baruch Hu do such a thing? What was he thinking? How could he impose such pain? Aren't we the Banim Atem LaHashem Elokechem? Aren't we his children? Doesn't he love us? Says Rabbi Moshe, and that's why we read Parshas Parah. Because Parshas Parah is the quintessential, is the paradigmatic chok. It's a mitzvah we simply don't understand. It's a mitzvah that Hashem says, you're going to do this simply because it's a gzeiras hamelech, as Rashi says. And therefore, says Rabbi Moshe, if we read and we learn this mitzvah, that we are committed and devoted to observing wholeheartedly, despite not fully understanding it, simply because that's what Hashem asked us to do, that is the absolutely perfect preparation to walk into Pesach. Because it'll help us come to terms with the recognition and realization that sometimes we have to be willing to accept that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does something and we don't necessarily understand why, but we have to strengthen ourselves in our emunah, in our faith, in our bitachon, our confidence in Hashem, that Hashem knows what He's doing with a capital H and how He runs the world. And so we read Parshas Parah to inculcate and to accept and to integrate and to internalize into our mind as a hachan, as a preparation, that the same way that Hashem is giving us this mitzvah that we don't really understand, but we're going to do it, we walk into the Pesach Seder learning about the experience, but never necessarily questioning why Hashem does it, because we're willing to accept that Hashem runs the world, and we have the confidence in Hashem to be able to run the world as He sees fit. And I think that's the beautiful thing about the Sefer is, on the one hand, I'm quoting the Sfas Emes, on the other hand, I'm quoting Rabbi Moshe, two different worlds. And that's really what I try to do, to try to tie together and to try to highlight the beauty of all the different dimensions, all the different perspectives and elements of Torah. They all come together. They're all relatable. They're all messages that we can accept and internalize. And they're all things that we can really integrate into our lives in a meaningful, but more importantly, in a tangible way.
Who is your book meant for?
My book is meant for Klal Yisrael. My book is meant for people who, I would say your balabas who is looking to say something over at his Yom Tif table, at his Shabbos table, which many of the Divrei Torah are applicable to, like the Dalet Parshios, and when Yom Tif overlaps with Shabbos. It's really meant for anyone who is looking for new ideas that are easily connectable, that you can easily say over. Really try to distill the message in a manner that you can really read it and say it over very shortly afterwards without having to be swallowed up by the complexities. And it's meant for people who want to inspire their Shabbos Yom Tov table, who want to use these Divrei Torah not to just be limited by that last paragraph, but then turn it out to the crowd and give them the opportunity to share their thoughts about it and to really spur conversation, which is ultimately the best way to ensure that we pass the messages of our Holy Torah and its values with passion. Simply giving over and having people receive doesn't necessarily do it for people. They have to be part of the experience. So when you can present something that they can buy into and that they can feel a part of, you have a fighting chance that those messages are going to perpetuate themselves and be passed on successfully to future generations.
Okay, well, thank you, Rabbi Schochet, for joining me. I will link in the show notes to the book for those who want to purchase it. It's available in Sfarim stores, it's available on Amazon, it's available on Mosaic's website. And with Mosaic's website, as always, you can use code CHATTER, CHATTER, CHATTER for 15% off.
all orders with that code. And thank you, Rabbi Schochet, for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.